Hello friends, how are you all doing? I hope you all have enjoyed our previous lesson on basic concepts in urban sociology, and I am sure you must also have tried that white paper introspection method if there was any confusion between the concepts. We will continue this aspect of discussion on various urban concepts, and in this lesson we will try to understand a beautiful dichotomy between rural, urban, and in that connection we will try to understand what do we mean by rural urban continuum, what is rural urban fringe, and what is the concept of Rur urban. If you can recall, from the beginning of our course I have been trying to convey that rural and urban, though they look like a dichotomous concepts, they are always interdependent in nature. So, we will try to further understand and explore this dichotomy and interdependence through these concepts. So, rural and urban, though reflect contrasting nature and structure, they present a dichotomy and convergence at several points of interaction. Rural and urban regions are interconnected and in several contexts form one system. Changes in one region therefore also affect the others. Urbanization in its primitive and most advanced format has resulted in massive rural and urban economic restructuring and geographic realignment of rural urban boundaries. Let me take a second to explain you why this realignment has taken place. We all know that cities are expanding. Why they are expanding? Because of rural to urban migration and also probably because of natural increase in the urban population. So, when the population of urban areas is expanding, many aspects of the rural areas also should be realigned. In 20th century, rural could be considered the opposite of urban, but in the process of urbanization, this opposition seems to be transforming drastically. Therefore, in this lesson, we will try to understand the concepts connected with rural urban continuum, rural urban fringe, and Rur urban. Let us begin our discussion with rural urban continuum. There are significant differences between rural and urban communities. We have also discussed about its distinction, if you can recall. However, it is equally significant to state that there is rarely a sharp division, physically or socially marked boundary between rural and urban. Rural-urban continuum refers to merging of town and country. The concept of rural-urban continuum is based on the assumption of rural-urban differences. Friends, have you all seen a rainbow in the sky? When you see a rainbow in the sky, though there are 7 colors we have been reading from our school times, but it is very difficult to concretely segregate the colors, though it looks like a spectrum of colors, but difficult to segregate. Similarly is the concept of rural-urban continuum. A simple rural-urban dichotomy of population is not sufficient, since it is not sufficient, neither very simple. There are gradations of urban and rural regions. Robert Redfield in 1930s made important contributions to develop the concept of folk, rural and urban continuum. He has constructed a continuum from small rural villages to large cities. More urban means that population is more secular, more individualistic, with a greater division of labor. Few sociologists have used the concept of rural-urban continuum to stress the idea that there are no sharp breaking points to be found in the degree or quantity of rural-urban differences. Robert Redfield has given the concept of rural-urban continuum on the basis of his study of Mexican peasants of Tepoztlán. The rapid process of urbanization through the establishment of industries, urban trades and facilities has decreased the differences between villages and cities. According to Professor A.R. Desai, our own very well known Indian sociologist, social life in countryside moves and develops in a rural setting just as social life in the urban area moves and develops in an urban setting. Their respective settings considerably determine rural and urban social life. From the analytical point of view, the characteristics of these two modes of living are represented by two concepts. What are they? Ruralism and urbanism. Ruralism signifies the rural mode of living in which there is predominance of traditions, customs, folk culture and joint family. On the other hand, urbanism signifies the urban mode of living in which there is predominance of impersonal relations, individualism and secondary associations. Let me take a minute to explain you what exactly A.R. Desai is trying to tell us. When I am talking about ruralism and when we are saying that rural traditions, so a village in Punjab, their rural traditions can be in complete contrast with the rural traditions of village in Telangana or in Andhra Pradesh. Similarly, when you talk about urban areas, though all cities look alike, but every urban area, every city has its own flavor, it has its own distinction. So, ruralism and urbanism, though they are in contrast with each other, but every rural area and every urban area, it has its own flavors. The rural social world is distinct from the urban social world on various indicators such as ethos of life, cultural patterns, socio-cultural groupings and modes of occupation, institutions, earning as well as livelihood. However, there are also structural similarities between the two with regard to the patterns of caste, kinship, even marriages, observance of religious practices, migrations, educational institutions, employment opportunities and administration are the other institutional sources of linkages between villages and cities. Thus, villages and towns cannot be simply as dichotomous entities. They are interlinked and yet distinct from each other. Alvin Bertrand, while discussing about rural-urban continuum, says, proponents of the continuum theory feel that rural-urban differences occur in a relative degree, in a range extending between two polar extremes of rural and urban. The continuum theory lays emphasis on rural-urban differences rather than on rural-urban dichotomy. Conventionally, rural-urban continuum proposes a linear depiction of contrasting natures of social relationships characteristic of rural and urban settlements. This was a very popular conceptual tool to classify different types of community and the transition between these communities. The concept of rural-urban continuum is the result of understanding the social change consequent to rapid urbanization. The rural life was homogeneous with high levels of mutual communication and social solidarity, less mobility and slow social change. The urban life, as Lewis Wirth said, were large, dense and heterogeneous, and that is produce the transient, disorderly, anonymous and formal associational relationships of urban living. Friends, just think of an example. Think of an example of rural and urban, what kind of groupings we get in villages or in rural areas and what kind of groupings are available in urban areas. So, if you do some kind of a reading or just think for a moment, you will be able to understand that the groupings in villages, they are not as impersonal as they are in urban areas. There are some sociologists who treat rural urban as dichotomous categories, have differentiated the two at various levels, including occupational differences, environmental differences, differences in the size of communities, differences even in density of population, differences in social mobility and direction of migration, differences in social stratification and in the systems of social interaction. Let me take a minute to explain you what do we mean by social stratification. Anyways, this lesson is also there in our coming days, we will be discussing more in detail, but for the time being, stratification is from the word strata. Strata means layers or levels. So, when you are talking about urban stratification, it implies that what kind of layers or levels exist in urban areas. So, caste, class, estate, these are very popular forms of stratification. Another view regarding rural and urban communities has been given by D.F. Pocock, British anthropologist, who believed that both village and city are elements of the same civilization and hence neither rural-urban dichotomy nor continuum is meaningful. M.S.A. Rao points out in the Indian context that although both village and town formed part of the same civilization characterized by institution of kinship and caste system in pre-British India, there were certain specific institutional forms and organizational ways distinguishing social and cultural life in towns from that in village. G.S. Ghurye believes that urbanization is migration of people from village to city and the impact it has on the migrants and their families. McIver remarks that though the communities are normally divided into rural and urban, the line of demarcation is not always clear between these two types of communities. There is no sharp demarcation to tell where the city ends and country begins. That is why remember rainbow. Every village possesses some elements of the city and every city carries some features of the village. Ram Krishna Mukherjee prefers the continuum model by talking of the degree of urbanization as a useful conceptual tool for understanding rural-urban relations. P.A. Sorokin and Zimmerman in Principles of Rural-Urban Sociology have stated that the factors distinguishing rural from urban communities include occupation, size and density of population as well as mobility, differentiation and stratification. Friends, Social mobility is a very important concept when we talk about rural urban continuum, because social mobility in rural areas, it follows more or less a closed model, but when you talk about social mobility in urban areas, it follows a open model. So what is this closed model? Usually if a society is predominated by caste system, there is no opening for you to change your caste. That is why it is called as closed model. Whereas in urban areas, the predominant stratification system is that of class. So a person of lower class can definitely achieve the status of that of upper class or elite class. So here the mobility is open. So rural areas is reflected through closed model of mobility, urban areas relatively reflects open model. Now let us discuss about what is this concept of rural urban fringe. RUF, we will be using this short form also. So rural urban fringe is not only a significant concept in sociological studies, it is also an important theory in settlement geography. The rural urban fringe is the boundary zone outside the urban area where rural and urban land uses amalgamate. It is the area where the city meets the countryside. Beautiful phrase, isn't it? It is an area of transition from agricultural and other rural land uses to urban use. Fringe is characterized by an extensive diversity of land use, including dormitory settlements, housing, middle income commuters who work in the main urban area. Over time, the characteristics of the fringe change from largely rural to largely urban. Suburbanization takes place at the urban boundary of rural urban fringe. Harrington describes the distinctive characteristics that it is an area which is partly assimilated in the growing urban complex, which is still partly rural, and where many of the residents live in the countryside but are not socially and economically forming part of it. The city does not grow outwards in well-defined patterns. It sprawls haphazardly, making rapid advances at one point and hardly moving at all at another. This results into incoherent landscape, which is the characteristic of the fringe. In Indian scenario, RUF or rural urban fringe is an area of mixed urban and rural population and land use which begins at the point where agricultural land use appear near the city and extend to the point where villages have distinct urban land uses, or where some persons at least from village community commute to city daily for work or other purposes. The RUF area is neither truly urban nor truly rural. It has certain characteristic land use, for example, garden centers, fruit, vegetable and floriculture fields, dairy works, our poultry farmhouses, agro-based industries, boarding schools, colleges, new residential colonies, etc. I am sure you must have witnessed this in and around your areas also. There is a constant change in the land use. Land shifts from primary, that is agriculture, to secondary and tertiary economic activities. Therefore, these areas provide good opportunities of employment for both rural and urban population. RUF paves wide mix of land uses ranging from a variety of commercial developments including out of town shopping centers to the city services and industries which are conveniently located at the margins. It is a widespread rural area into which residential and domestic development is extending. The new industrial sites and other urban uses are in the processes of development along its main lines of communication, often clustered around existing villages and small towns. The rural urban fringe is characterized by a mixture of land uses, most of which require large areas of land. For instance, housing developments as urban sprawl continues, science and business parks, hypermarkets and superstores, retail parks and out of town shopping centers, office developments, hotels, conference centers, airport expansion, etc. It has also been asserted that RUF leads to challenges like loss of large areas of countryside along with the aesthetic sense, suburbanization of villages, increase in traffic and pollution. Friends, we have so far tried to understand about rural urban continuum and rural urban fringe. So, if you compare these both concepts, there are two things which can be our takeaways from these two concepts. The first thing is that rural urban is not very clearly distinct areas. We should always remember rainbow in this context. Second thing, the world is urbanizing globally. In fact, entire planet Earth is globalizing and urbanizing. So, in this context also, the understanding and evolution of rural urban continuum and rural urban fringe will also keep changing. Now, let us understand one more very interesting concept called as Rur Urban. So, the word Rurban, it is also called as Rur Urban or Rurban. So, it is a kind of a tongue twister which you will have to practice. For the time being, let us use the word Rurban. So, the word Rurban is a combination of rural and urban, and it refers to a geographic territory, landscape, which possesses the economic characteristics and lifestyles of an urban area while retaining its essential rural area features. Sorokin, in his Rural Urban Sociology, which was published in 1929, uses the word rurbanization, which according to Sorokin is a terminological invention of C.J. Galpin in 1918. Parsons in 1949 exposed the idea of rurbanization in his book Essays in Sociological Theory. According to him, urban communities are the rural socio-geographic spaces where styles of life and the standard of living have changed so much that they resemble those in urban localities. Friends, you must be wondering that we are referring about 1980s, 1920s, then how true is it with context to India? These are the concepts and the theoretical contributions given by prominent sociologists. But when we talk with specific reference to India, the hardcore urbanization only started after second 5-year plan, that is after 1960s, and the pace of industrialization and urbanization increased after 1990s with the announcement of the economic reforms. Merriam-Webster dictionary also defines this concept of urban as relating to or constituting an area which is chiefly residential but where some farming is carried on. Cambridge Dictionary uses urban to describe land in the countryside on the edge of a town or city on which new housing, businesses, etc. are being built. Here, urban essentially refers to a fringe area of the urban. Urbanization is the result of urban-rural interactions, including accumulation of capital, remittances and exposure to Western, modern ideas and lifestyles that eventually build new mindsets. The emergence of urban agglomeration, urban sprawl and urban areas are global phenomena. However, features ascribed to urban areas may vary from country to country, and hence the term urban may be understood differently in different countries or areas. In the Indian context, urban setting is seen commonly in states like Kerala, Goa and mountainous regions, unlike in other larger states where rural-urban divide is more manifest. In Europe, urban aims to analyze the territorial partnership practices for towns, cities and rural areas, achieve better cooperation between different actors in developing and implementing urban-rural initiatives, promote territorial multi-level governance, assess possible economic and social gains from enhanced rural-urban cooperation, identify the potential role of urban-rural partnership for improving regional competitiveness and regional governance. In India, the term urban entered the official government literature through Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Urban Mission announced in the Union Budget in 2014-15. This was following the urban development model of urbanization of rural areas adopted in the state of Gujarat, through which people living in the rural areas are given efficient civic infrastructure and associate services. Ensuring availability of amenities to rural population is on the top priority of central government, as majority of India's population resides in villages. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Urban Mission is launched to deliver integrated project-based infrastructure in rural areas, which will also include development of economic activities and skill development. The preferred mode of delivery is through public-private partnerships (PPPs), while using various scheme funds for financing. Government approved Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Urban Mission with an outlay of rupees 5,142 crores on 16 September 2015, almost 6 years by now. The mission aims at development of rural growth clusters which have latent potential for growth in all the states and union territories of India, which would trigger overall development in the region. These clusters would be developed by provisioning of economic activities, developing skills and local entrepreneurship, and providing infrastructure amenities. The urban mission will thus develop a cluster of smart villages. Thus, in India, for the purpose of these urban areas, refer to a cluster of 15 to 20 villages having about 30 to 40 lakh population. The clusters will be geographically contiguous gram panchayats with a population of about 25,000 to 50,000 in plain and coastal areas and a population of 5,000 to 15,000 in desert, hilly or tribal areas. As far as practicable, clusters of villages follow administrative convergence units of gram panchayats. These clusters are intended to be well delineated areas with planned layouts prepared following the planning norms as laid down in state, town and country planning acts, similar central or state statutes, which would be duly notified by the states or union territories. These plans would be finally integrated with the district plans, master plans, as the case may be. Friends, India is land of villages. I think you all are convinced with that. But at the same time, India is also urbanizing with a massive pace. And as we herald into new decade and new century, the population will keep urbanizing with a massive pace. So, keeping in view all these changes and keeping this in the context, there will be more and more new concepts which will emerge to make us understand that how rural and urban they interact, how are they interdependent, how do they interrelate with each other, substituting for each other's existence and sustenance. So, though in this lesson as well as in our previous lesson, where our entire focus was to understand the basic concepts. In our previous lesson, most of the concepts were revolving around cities. For example, we were talking about urbanism, urban agglomeration, we spoke about mega cities, satellite cities, global cities, and in this lesson, we tried to understand the connect between rural and urban. So, one thing what we have to keep in mind is, irrespective of whatever the concept we evolve or whatever the concept we establish in coming years, the bottom line remains that there will be a constant interaction between these two. Now, it is a matter of debate whether these two concepts have to be seen as a continuum, whether it has to be seen as a fringe, whether they overlap, whether what kind of interaction. This is all very much debatable and many insights can come out of this. But as student of urban sociology, we have to only keep one thing in mind, that if cities has to develop, our villages have to develop, and if villages have to develop, our cities should also be developed. We cannot live in isolating these two urban or rural hamlets or habitats for that matter. So, I am sure you will agree with me on this point, and if you have any interesting things to share, or if you have any questions or any observations which you think that you should share with me, please feel free to write to me on my email pandevini@gmail.com. You also are open to ask any questions or initiate the discussion. Now, the next lesson which we are going to talk, there again we will be focusing into hardcore urbanization. Now, from urban concepts to rural urban concepts, now we will shift to urbanization, and I am sure that you are enjoying this evolution of the concepts, and you will continue to be with us and evolve and explore more and more about urbanization. So, I will see you in the next class with our topic on urbanization, concept, causes and consequences. Till then, be happy, be safe. Thank you all.